Okay, so I'm going to be reading a couple chapters from Clive Barker's Weaveworld. Throughout the book, there are some illustrations drawn by him, and this is the first one attributed to the first chapter. The first chapter is titled Homing. Nothing ever begins. There is no first moment, no single word or place from which this or any other story springs. The threads can always be traced back to some earlier tale, and to the tales that preceded that. Though as the narrator's voice recedes, the connections will seem to grow more tenuous, for each age will want the tale told as if it were of its own making. Thus the pagan will be sanctified, the tragic become laughable, great lovers will stoop to sentiment, and demons dwindle to clockwork toys. Nothing is fixed. In and out the shuttle goes, fact and fiction, mind and matter woven into patterns that may have this in common, that hidden among them is a filigree that will in time become a world. It must be arbitrary then, the place at which we choose to embark. Somewhere between past half forgotten and a future yet only glimpsed. This place, for instance, this garden, untended since the death of its protector 3 months ago, and now running riot beneath a blindingly bright late August sky, its fruits hanging unharvested, its herbaceous borders coaxed by mutiny by a summer of torrential rain and sudden, sweltering days. This house, identical to the hundreds of others on the street alone, built with its back so close to the railway track that the passage of the slow train from Liverpool to Crewe rocks the china dogs on the dining room sill. And with this young man, who now steps out from the back door and makes his way down the beleaguered path from the ramshackle hut, from which there rises a welcoming chorus of coos and flutterings. His name is Calhoun Mooney, but he is universally known as Cal. He is 26 and has worked for 5 years at an insurance firm in the city center. It's a job that he takes no pleasure in, but escape from the city he's lived in all his life seems more unlikely than ever since the death of his mother, all of which may account for the wary expression on his well-made face. He approaches the door of the pigeon loft, opens it, and at that moment, for want of a better, the story takes wings. Cal had told his father several times that the wood at the bottom of the loft door was deteriorating. It could only be a matter of time before the planks rotted completely, giving the pigeons who lived and grew gross along the railroad line access to the pigeons. But Brendan Mooney had shown little or no interest in his raising birds since Eileen's death. This despite, or perhaps because, the birds had been his abiding passion during her life. How often had Cal seen his mother complain that Brendan spent more time with the precious pigeons than he did inside the house? She would not have had that complaint to make now. Now Cal's father sat mostly every day at the back window, staring out into the garden and watching the wilderness steady and take charge of his wife's handiwork, as if he might find in the spectacle of dissolution some clue as to how grief might be similarly erased. There was a little sign, and he was learning much from his vigil, however. Every day, when Cal came back from the house in Chariot Street, a house he thought he had left for good half a decade ago, but which found his father's isolations had obliged him to return to, it seemed as though he found Brendan slightly smaller, not hunched, but somehow shrunken, as though he decided to present the smallest possible target to a world suddenly grown hostile. Murmuring a welcome to the 40 or so birds in the loft, Cal stepped inside, to be met with a scene of high agitation. All but a few of the pigeons were flying back and forth in their cages near to hysteria. Had the rats been in, Cal wondered? He cast around for any damage, but there was no visible sign of what fueled his furor. He had never seen them so excited. For fully half a minute he stood in bewilderment, watching their display, the din of their wings making his head reel before deciding to step into the largest of the cages and claim the prize birds from the melee before they did themselves damage. He unlatched the cage and had opened it no more than 2 or 3 inches when the last year's champions, a normally sedate cock known as they all were by his number, 33, flew at the gap. Shocked by the speed of the bird's approach, Cal let go of the door, and in the seconds between his fingers slipping from the latch and his retrieval of it, 33 was out. "Damn you," Cal shouted, cursing himself as much as the bird, for he left the door of the loft itself ajar, and, apparently careless of what harm might do to himself in his bid, 33 was making for the sky. In the few moments it took Cal to latch the cage again, the bird was at the door and away. Cal went in stumbling pursuit, but by the time he had gotten back into open air, 33 was already fluttering above the garden. At roof height he flew around the corner in 3 ever larger odd circles, as if orienting himself. Then he seemed to fix his objective and took off in a north-northeasterly direction. A rapping drew Cal's attention, and he looked down to see his father standing at the window, mouthing something to him. There was more animation on Brendan's harried face than Cal had seen in months. The escape of the bird seemed to have temporarily roused him from his despondency. Moments later he was at the back door, asking what had happened. Cal had no time for explanation. "It's off," he yelled. Then, keeping his eye on the sky as he went, he started down the path at the side of the house. When he reached the front, the bird was still in sight. Cal leapt the fence and crossed Chariot Street at a run, determined to give chase. It was, he knew, an all but hopeless pursuit. With a tailwind, a prime bird could reach a top speed of 70 miles per hour. And though 33 had not raced for the best part of the year, he could still easily outpace a human runner. But Cal knew he couldn't go back to his father without making some effort to track the escape, however futile. At the bottom of the street, he lost sight of the quarry behind the rooftops, and so made a detour to the footbridge that crossed the Woolton Road, mounting the steps 3 and 4 at a time. From the top, he was rewarded with a good view of the city. North toward Woolton Hill, and off east and southeast, all over Allerton toward Hunt's Cross, row upon row of council house roofs presented themselves, shimmering in fierce heat of the afternoon. The herringbone rhythm of the close-packed streets rapidly giving way to the industrial wastelands of Spig. Cal could see the pigeon, too, though he was rapidly diminishing dot. It mattered little, for from this elevation 33's destination was perfectly apparent. Less than 2 miles from the bridge, the air was full of wheeling birds, drawn to the spot no doubt by some concentration of food in the area. Every year about at least one such day, when the ant or gnat population suddenly boomed, and the bird life of the city was united in its gluttony. Gulls up from mudbanks in Mersey, flying tip to tip with thrush and jackdaw and starling, all content to join their jamboree while the summer was still warm their backs. This, no doubt, was the call 33 had heard. Bored with his balanced diet of maize and maple peas, tired of pecking order of the loft and the predictability of each day, the bird had wanted out, wanted up and away, a day of high life, of food that had to be chased a little, and tasted all better for that, of the companionship of wild things. All this went through Cal's head in a vague sort of way, while he watched the circling flocks. It would be perfectly impossible, he knew, to locate an individual bird amongst these riotous thousands. He knew he would have to trust 33 would be content with his feast on one wing, and then when he was sated, do as he was trained to do, and come home. Nevertheless, the sheer spectacle of so many birds exercised a peculiar fascination, and, crossing the bridge, Cal began to make his way towards the epicenter of the feathered cyclone.